the host of Wall Street Week, David Westin, joining us as he does every day around this time. And David, there's supposed to be a big meeting today down in Washington, the second meeting between the President of the United States and the Speaker of the House, hopefully trying to resolve their differences over the debt ceiling. But based on some of the political rhetoric I've heard, it doesn't seem like they're any closer.
Exactly. I think it comes up in like 10 minutes, supposedly, with the White House. And hope is the right word. But it's hope rather than really expectations. Because, as you know, Kevin McCarthy, Speaker of the House, is going into this, actually, if anything, hardening his position, saying we need those work requirements, things like that. The President Biden say are off the table. So it's really going to come to a head here pretty soon as President Biden gets on a plane to go over to Japan.
Well, then that raises a question as to sort of what options the White House and more importantly the Treasury would have should we actually do end up at that fiscal cliff.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we talked to Bob Hormats about. You know Bob, he was the former Undersecretary of State. He also was former Vice Chairman of Goldman Sachs. And we asked him actually how big a problem this is and what are the options open in Washington right now.
Ultimately, there has to be some sort of compromise between Republicans and Democrats, and within the Republican Party and within the Democratic Party. That makes it even more complicated because the parties are divided internally. But the second is that people have to begin to take this much more seriously. There's a lot of complacency. There are even some people who draw pleasure out of the fact that they're using the debt default threat as leverage. The fact, however, is if you look at American history, every administration has understood that you have to make big compromises if you're going to solve the problem, and we're not at that point yet.
President Biden has said he will not really tie the debt ceiling issue to cuts in spending. They have to be separately dealt with. Does he have a way not to compromise? You say as a compromise. Does he have a way? Some people are talking about extraordinary things like the 14th Amendment.
Well, the amendments are interesting. There are actually two amendments in the Constitution. There are two parts of the Constitution. One is Article 6 of the original Constitution, which says that the new government under the Constitution would pay the debts of the old government under the Continental Congress. That was a big issue. The other thing is that the government would pay the state debts of the Revolutionary War. Then you get to Article 14, and again, it makes the point that the government is responsible for all the debts incurred in the war.
I understand what you're saying about the Constitution and the circumstances it gave rise back when the Constitution was originally written and then after the Civil War with the 14th Amendment. At the same time, how do the markets react to all of this? I mean, we talk about some extraordinary action. That's untested in the courts. Would the markets stand still for that? They need some certainty, and I'm not sure you get certainty if they invoke the 14th Amendment.
Well, during the Civil War, after the Civil War, there was a feeling that the 14th Amendment would provide that certainty. I totally agree now that it would be contested in the courts and it might not hold up. So I think to rely on that in this environment really, in a way, skirts a broader issue, and that is, at some point, a fundamental bipartisan compromise that, on one hand, ensures that the United States will pay its debts, on the other hand, ensures that the United States will stop accumulating more and more debt at the rate it's been doing. But fundamentally, you can't circumvent the political process.
Bob, you spent your career as a diplomat as well as on Wall Street. You really ride both horses, as it were. Have we done real damage already to the credibility of the United States, even if we come up with a compromise?
Yes, we have. The fact that the notion of repaying our debt, honoring our debt, is even in doubt and is a hot potato political issue, and we don't have bipartisan agreement on it, leads people to doubt the credibility of the United States. I'm actually surprised the markets are not more upset because they're thinking, well, ultimately we've solved these problems in the past. We'll solve them this time around as well. But this time around is different because I think you have huge divisions within the political parties. And you also, in the past, have had everyone more or less saying, you've got to resolve this issue. Now there are actually people who don't seem particularly preoccupied with or committed to resolve the issue.
Bob, if the United States were to do the unthinkable and not pay the debts that it's incurred, it obviously would do damage at home as well as abroad. But let me take the other side of it, and particularly what the Republicans are pressing for. Is there some damage being done to the United States by running up all the debts and deficits that we are running up? Because our strength abroad, as I understand it, really depends on our strength at home.
Absolutely, and that's why I really put the two together. I think it's important that we repay our debts, but I think it's also important that we get off this track that we have been on for the last decade or so of accumulating more and more debt. We're used to accumulating debt during wars, and then when the war is over, we pay it back. Or then you have something like the pandemic where you need money for a period of time, and then the country pulls together and figures out ways of paying it back and servicing it. That's now gone. There's a notion that parties can compromise on one thing in Washington, that is, on how to spend more money. So there needs to be some discipline. It may look easy to this generation, but won't look easy to our children and grandchildren. They're the ones who will inherit the burden unless this generation is much more responsible on fiscal policy.